Have you ever felt like you were living a narrative that someone else wrote for you? Maybe your story was written by your family, your church, or your culture. You may be asking yourself, what is my story? And how does it uniquely fit into the story of the gospel? At the Allender Center, we believe that your story reveals God's wild goodness in a way that no other story can. We've helped thousands of people understand and live their unique stories, and we'd like to invite you to start engaging your story with the free guided exercise available for download at theallendercenter.org/story.
Thank you for listening to the Allender Center podcast. I'm Dr. Dan Allender.
And I'm Rachael Clinton Chen. We're fiercely committed to providing hope and healing to a fragmented world.
And restoration for the heart.
Thank you for joining us. Let's get this conversation started. Good people with good bodies. I am so glad to be here with my friend and colleague, Dan Allender, as we talk a bit more about something we talk about quite often, whether we do it explicitly or implicitly. And it's something that I've committed to very intentionally this year in a new way. We're going to talk more about healing. And even as I say that word, like so much comes up. I think probably for all of us, this is a word that stirs a lot. It's a buzzword right now. In some ways, it can even become like a mythological new dogmatic pursuit of perfection that's not really healing. All of us are in need of healing. And when I say that I'm intentionally leaning into it this year, I'm just 2.5 years postpartum. I'm in my early 40s, which as a woman means entering all kinds of perimenopausal, possibly menopausal hormonal distress waters. And I am parenting a toddler and 2 teenagers, which is bringing up new, not unfamiliar, but maybe new intensity of certain triggers in my body and heart and mind. So I've just been aware coming into this new year that I need to actually be more intentional about pursuing healing. And that's a little bit what we're going to talk about today, that we face many obstacles when we intention ourselves toward healing. And that doesn't need to lead to despair. So Dan, what comes up for you?
It's the word damn it. I just, there's no other swear words actually that come to mind. But it's like healing, damn it. I know how important it is. I'm a participant in other people's healing, and I have the privilege of having.
We're in healing work.
it's our business, but there's so much disappointment. Oh my gosh! I think the notion of healing over the holiday period. 2 of my dearest friends in our church. One went into the hospital with a very severe fever, and it was regulated. Then it came back. All sorts of tests, no conclusion. He's better, but it's almost like, what happened? And then another dear friend who had been in a motorcycle accident, but in the process, they discovered portions of his intestines that were either damaged from the fall, or the fall itself gave access to being able to see that there are intestinal issues. And he just went into the hospital again. This is like the 3rd or 4th trip. And all I can say is, and if you're in your early 40s, I'm in my early 70s, it feels like a lot of what Becky and I end up praying about is healing on behalf of others and our own. But the reality of, damn it, I don't know. I don't know where there has been more of a sense of, again, the goodness of God in seeing healing. And more of the question, is God good? In the struggles with regard to healing doesn't seem to be this single dose that somehow, when it comes, it resolves and things are better. So all I can say is when we talk about healing, we're really talking about the struggle with hope.
Yeah. Well, and when we're talking about the struggle with hope, we're talking about this larger story that we find ourselves in. You and I were talking beforehand that in many ways, so much of the dis-ease, the disease, the fragmentation, the heartache, the brokenness, the anxiety, the depression that we deal with, the impact of trauma is coming from the reality of living in a world that is very broken, very fragmented, and has really oppressive systems that way down.
Perpetuate.
Yeah. And there's kind of this sense of like, if you just have the right resources or know the right people, or have enough wealth, then you can kind of, I often say like healing work feels almost like a job at times, like a part-time job where you need that kind of time, money, resource, and access. And that there's like, I think just to own like, there is a truth to that injustice in our world. So we know when we're approaching this topic, and in many ways, inviting people to lean into hope and therefore to lean into action, that we're asking you to do that when we ourselves face many of the obstacles we're talking about, and also bear privilege to be able to overcome some of these obstacles that many people are not able to. So this does feel like when you say, yeah, we're talking about hope, it feels so deeply connected to the human struggle. And why I think I want to just say from the onset, why we need each other. Mm-hmm. And why we need especially in this season of our United States world, why we need imagination for community care, like resource sharing. Because I do think this kind of sense of like you pursue healing just very individually and power through, isn't really feasible or sustainable. And I don't think it's what we're meant for.
Well, and again, I couldn't agree more. And yet we have a dear friend and colleague who, due to issues with regard to her teeth, it ended up having to have major surgery. But there were only 2 people in the United States of America who could do this kind of work. And you go, what? 2 people. One person in South Carolina, the other person in Seattle. 2 people? And so the dilemma is that healing sometimes requires specialists, access to specialists, when there are so few who seem to be able to do certain kinds of particular work. There's a generic healing. Then there's often very, very specific work that needs to be done. And I think of that in the broad range of both physical, spiritual, psychological, relational. And the idea that we live without access, it's so much an interplay of every question we have about the ultimate goodness of God. You mean there are only 2 people who can do this kind of surgery? How come there aren't hundreds of people? And part of the reason is very specific, unique illnesses don't have the same monetary effect. We know with regard to certain illnesses that very few suffer, that drug companies are not going to do the investment because it doesn't have the prospect. So where capitalism, a regard for the structure of one's own career, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So there's just so much that roils within me when we begin to talk about this. So hopefully we can say, because we believe it, we really do believe it, healing is possible.
Yes.
But it is not very seldom immediate, quick, and resolved in a way in which it doesn't have, in some ways, the old phrase that sometimes the cure is worse, or it feels worse than the disease itself. So where does all that take you as we launch into this?
Oh, well, I think back to, I don't tend to do because my birthday's in December, I usually set my intention I set an intention because I just have to be that specific. And it's more a way of saying, okay, what is something I actually need to put energy, resource, time, effort, attention to? And I came back to, okay, I really need to be intentional about pursuing more particular healing in this season ahead. So, I mean, I'm talking very basic things like getting a colonoscopy. Well,
Hey, the drugs are great, by the way, just so you know.
Going to get an ultrasound on my hand to figure out this ganglion cyst I have on my finger. I mean, it's things that are that particular, but also I got blood work done recently and am pre-diabetic. And I know a huge part of that is postpartum life. I was breastfeeding for 2 years. It's you're just hungry all the time. We have teenagers. We're on the go. Again, I actually have a lot of compassion for why I've been eating a lot of sugar. But I also know my body doesn't break down sugar very well. And so there's just, a lot of little red flags, right, coming. Like I mentioned, more triggers that feel connected to my story, feel connected to my nervous system, feel connected to their ways. In some ways, it's that check engine light comes on. Again, I've talked about this enough on this podcast. So many of the healing processes I'm in will not reach a conclusion or perfection on this side of eternity. And it can be so frustrating when it's how am I back here again? And I think what I find hope in is I'm back here again with different resources, with more healing and integration, more capacity, more of a reminder of okay, you actually do have some practices and skills, and you have enough vulnerability to scream, help me, which is really what I feel the intention for me it really was kind of a way of saying, I need help in a new way. And it's going to take some intentionality. And also it's going to take some supernatural spiritual provision. And it's going to take some humility. And it's going to take some courage. And it's certainly going to take some leaning into hope because I'm tired and I'm already overworked and I'm taking care of a toddler and I have enough obstacles financially, physically, emotionally, spiritually to kind of be I'll just kind of keep going until it gets really bad.
Yeah. Well, I always come back to this phrase, probably to me, one of the most disturbing sentences Jesus spoke to the men at Bethsaida, at the pool of Shalom, and where he says, do you want to be healed? And that infuriates me because there is so much suffering to be at that pool every single day, looking to get into the water when it's stirred, to be the one who, in one sense, receives the benefit of what seems to imply a kind of singularity of healing. You better be first, because whatever healing is going to come to the first person into the water.
Right.
And because of his disability, he could not make it in. So to ask that question to a man who, for decades, apparently 3 decades, has been waiting to be healed, feels like one of the most, shall we say, insensitive questions. And indeed, that question seems to be one that I resist because as we have this conversation about healing, my daughter Annie at one point over the holidays just said, as you're aging, I have seen you grow in your ability to engage what I know was lots of fear. But I also know there's just lots of fear within you that makes my heart grieve. And I'm like, when your child, who's now an adult and a healer, begins to name the arena, at least one, that needs the work of healing, I felt defensive, certainly at first, but her kindness and her invitation. So that became, toward the end of the year, the beginning of this new year, something that has required a kind of, as you put it, intentionality. And I think let's underscore that when you know there is something not well within you, it is easier to live with it than to open the door to hope and then operate with intentionality, which then requires more consciousness, more choice, in your case, doctor's visits, appointments, etc. And in that process, it's back to most of us have learned to adapt to the illnesses, because whatever initial, entry into healing may not have brought about the things that we most desire.
Yeah.
When we look at what people do with regard to our narrative-focused trauma care program, I so often find people at the very beginning of their work reluctant, open, ambivalent. Like, is this going to be of any help? Damn it! And again, I'm not going to say that every person finds equal amount of help, but the healing process, whether it be a story workshop, whether it be narrative-focused trauma care, whether it be therapy, reading a book, going to an acupuncturist, get a colonoscopy, it's all effort that feels to some degree initially futile, that opens up more hope, but oftentimes doesn't bring what we desire. And to remain in a process with the intentionality that this healing is iterative, usually, not singular and one dose. And in that, it's a constant, in one sense, battle, war with, will I keep hoping? Will I keep acting in directions that actually are toward healing?
Yeah, I mean, it makes me think about, I think so much of the work of narrative-focused trauma care is actually finding a language of your body and your emotions and paying attention in a new way and understanding like the patterns of how you relate, but also the systems you're a part of and how they relate. And in some ways, I remember in my early work in kind of understanding my story and listening to my body, the awareness felt really beautiful and relieving, right? Like, oh,
that makes sense.
Yeah, I'm not just anxious. Like, there's other things at work, right? And yet that awareness doesn't immediately lead to the kind of transformation. And in fact, like, I think in some ways I thought, oh, if I just work hard enough, if I just do enough healing work, right? There's a fundamentalism here, a dogmatism. If I just do enough healing work, then I can break all the generational curses that like I carry in my body and in my personhood, and I won't pass them on to my daughter. And here I am with awareness of some of the ways my behavior might impact her. And I'm still not able to fully be a perfectly healed, perfectly loving, perfectly stable and calm and, just always getting it right kind of mom. And so there is an aspect of like, the more we understand our brokenness and our beauty, in some ways it intensifies the ache. And kind of where I was going when you were talking is like, over the new year, several weeks ago or a few weeks ago, I was at a conference with my husband. He's in campus ministry. It's Impact National Conference. Impact Movement is an incredible organization. They work primarily with Black college students, so you should check them out. But one of the speakers was just, going in some ways, what are we being invited to stay in this like work of the kingdom? And she said kind of, I was feeling real convicted. Things like sometimes God might, pull you out of certain contexts, family system, organizations or whatever, and bring you kind of healing to send you back to those contexts. She was talking about Moses, right? So send you back to those contexts to bring liberation with the Spirit. So I was feeling convictions there. But then she said this phrase like, some of you all need to forgive, not for like the sake of the person who harmed you, but for your own sake. And it was like the Holy Spirit. It was like if there was like a big spotlight UFO beaming down on you, and you just feel it. And I've been in those moments before. I've been a Christian for a long time. This language is not unfamiliar to me. Are these moments where the Spirit is bringing conviction? But usually it's like maybe my unforgiveness or like the kind of bitterness I'm holding on to is like one or two people. But for me, it was really like 30 people. It was literally like, the Spirit was like, and you need to do some work here. And you need to do some work here. And again, I'm like, I know I'm kind of going off on a rabbit trail, but it's back to it. Healing, I think, is so multi-layered and it covers such depths we can't even see. And I did feel like it was one of those moments where Jesus was saying to me, do you want to be healed? And a part of me was like, no,
not really.
No, I'm good.
Thanks for the offer.
Because ultimately I'm such a lover that one of the ways I know I try to keep myself safe is like, if I can just be so angry at people, then they can never get close to me and hurt me again. But that's carrying around a lot of weight, and probably intensifying some of my defense mechanisms that are also getting triggered by a tiny human who's constantly telling me what to do and not listening to me. So if you have parenting advice that is like gentle parenting for strong-willed children, you could send me a personal message. But yeah, there was something really powerful for me about that invitation. Again, I've said yes to healing in a very intentional way. Jesus knows that. I'm like, yeah, I'm in. I'm all in. That was not a layer I was actually like thinking about when I was thinking about like, okay, I need to do some more story work. I need to do more repenting work around like my privilege and how I'm connected in the world in the larger story. The sense of like, you need to actually work on some forgiveness and letting go and making amends was not on my bingo card for healing.
No. Well, I mean, again, what I can say at my vaunted age is that if healing becomes your primary goal, you have nothing else to do in life but to heal. And it can't happen that way. And so, yeah, I too was diagnosed with prediabetes. And there's been some small movement, mostly through the use of a lovely drug called metformin. But on the other hand, it has required choice with regard to what I eat and what I don't. But I was more taken by how healing, well, we all know certain realms, be it personal, be it relational, be it psychological, be it familial, physical, blah, blah. But it's more when the door gets knocked on that we weren't actually thinking about. So, you're sitting.
It is actually like, I think, really connected to a lot of the health issues, like the physical health issues and the emotional health issues. Of course it's connected. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, you're sitting at an Impact conference. I'm having a lovely holiday time and my daughter knocks on the door. So you begin to realize, wait a minute, that the Spirit knows the work that needs to be done. And the Spirit is so, 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 so gracious in offering us those moments of really revelation, of something's being named, and I'm now being invited in. But let's talk a little bit about the process for you. Again, not just going to a physician,
Mm-hmm.
beginning to pray more, think more, write more. There are lots of things that we can articulate. But to you, what's the core required for the movement of healing?
Well, I think we kind of put words to it when I said like my cry for help. Like in some ways, um, for me, it usually starts with like at least acknowledging I'm not well. I'm not well. Um, and I mean, I want to pause. I want to go back to something you said just to make it more clear, and then we can come back to this. Yeah, and it's not like there's all these kind of new age healing, focus on healing, all the different ways you can heal. It's all, I mean, in some ways, like healing in many ways it's a part of mercy. It's also a part of justice. But part of what compels me is to be more available for love, to be more open to human connection, to grow my hope, to stay in the fight towards justice and mercy and the kingdom of God coming to earth as it is in heaven. That is what ultimately compels me. So even, yes, for myself, I'm not well, but starting to see the ways in which my not being well is impacting the people I love and the people I'm called to serve.
Yes.
Even if that call to serve is changing constantly. So, yeah.
Well, it's in James 4 where we are to call the elders. We're to call mature people. We're to call people to come and pray for us and to lay hands on us and to anoint us with oil. There are, if that can be broadly spoken, there are rituals involved in healing. There's rituals involved in beginning a medical process. I have been a proponent and utilized the grace and services of acupuncture over the last 30 some years. And in that process, iterative, month by month, year by year, there are benefits that accrue, but sometimes they're so apparently negligible that you don't see the larger benefit. I need a community that comes alongside and, in one sense, exposes, invites, but also affirms and stands with in that process. So again, to say healing can't take our lives in the sense that you do nothing but heal, but there is something about love of your own body, love of your body and what it can bring others when you are healthier, that is that prompting to be able to say, well, I had not planned on fear being a fundamental focus for the year 2025. But some journaling, some writing, some conversations, it's just been clearer that, Annie has targeted a really important thing in our hearts. But I want to, again, come back to that. It's by the willingness to ask, but asking always requires the ability to name that we are at some level desperate. Something is not well, and we've not learned to adapt to it so that it actually just becomes another fragment of how we're living. Is where something gets acknowledged. I'm not well. And I don't want to remain unwell, whether that is in your marriage, whether that's in your relationship with your children. There's something that begins with desperation, and that is a process of asking. Does that make sense?
Yeah, makes a lot of sense.
Well, if people know, I'm actually reflecting on Matthew chapter 7, 7 through 12. And I think this is a crucial category for maturing, but we are to ask, but we're also to seek. So when you think about seeking, where does your mind and heart go?
Oh, it goes to a lot of different places. Because I think one of the things I'm learning to seek in this particular season is community. and resource sharing and a deeper imagination. I will always be seeking medical care, even though I am at odds with our medical systems. I think they are wildly unjust and lack access. Like, it feels like a fight just to get access to a decent care provider and to have the financial resources. But I think seeking lots of different opportunities for healing, like I said, like spiritual opportunities and prayer and care from a spiritual community and those who care about nourishing the soul and soul care. Even I have a lot of lament that I don't have as much connection to, like some of the medicinal healing wisdom of my ancestors, because I think so much of that got cut off in their own movement and migration and trauma. Because I think a lot of cultures do have some of that healing wisdom intact. And that's why it's like the role of community and ways that, like, healing medicines that are indigenous to different people and communities that are really powerful and aren't something you're going to find going to a medical care provider. It doesn't mean you don't need medical care. It's just this sense that I actually believe deeply that God wired us. Our bodies long for healing. I mean, it takes me back to Romans 8. Our bodies long for healing. The earth longs for healing. So like, even seeing how my healing is so deeply connected with the healing of the whole earth, like our earth longs for healing, our relationships, like our communities, like there is a cry for being made whole, for being made new. And sometimes even the tiniest step, like, is really like a mustard seed that goes like a really long way. So I've shared in a whole podcast series, like things I didn't expect when healing from trauma. I've radically accepted that I will have many seasons of like an iteration, like a cyclical iteration, where I'm not back at the beginning, but I'm back to a familiar place. I have autoimmune stuff that I will need to tend to for the long haul. It's not all the time. It's not constant. But when it flares up, that is a sign for me that things are not well. Again, friendships, and just nourishment in general. So, for example, part of my intention for this year, again, get some healing for my gut, but also like have more community. Part of that is tending to the unforgiveness, because I kind of kept myself cut off from a lot of community as a way to like not be hurt or disappointed or abandoned or all the things that are just actually a part of being human and a part of being in community. Again, it's a holistic front for me, but it also feels like I don't have to. Sometimes there are seasons of healing if we're dealing with serious issues that require more acute care, right? And I would say I'm not as much in an acute care season as I have an opportunity to move intentionally, but slowly, so that things can go more deep, can be more sustainable. And so again, for me, this is more of a season of like baby steps to 4 o'clock. If you're, what's that movie? Therapists hate it, but it's. What about
Bob? Oh, good God.
Baby steps to 4 o'clock.
Thank you for bringing heartache and terror.
I know, I'm sorry.
Literally,
baby steps to 4 o'clock.
Literally, the first time I was forced to watch it, 2 of my dearest friends, Dave and Tremper, literally sat on me physically, literally held me down to keep me watching this like horror film. Absolutely. Anyone who thinks it's a comedy is not a therapist. Anyway, back to the point, though, that the reiterative process, I think that's where I get frustrated, because I know there are literally hundreds of ways for healing to happen, and they are overlapping. No one's created a kind of synthesis of the physical, the psychological, the spiritual. So the reality of there are times where I know that I'm in the kind of spiritual warfare where a good therapist is not going to help. I need somebody who really knows how to engage the issues of prayer, deliverance, freedom from spiritual warfare. There are other times, obviously, where there are things that are highly connected to my own past that, again, I've done work, and I know there's always more work to be done. And when those realities come to the surface, it would be glorious if there was an apex, a person or process or group that held all healing in one hand, which is, again, the impulse of I want control. And the idea of seeking leaves me at a point where I'm going to have to go to multiple different worlds and try again and see what happens, and then seek against someone else. So the interplay of ask, desperation, seek, be willing to risk, and then knock. Again, that notion of we've got to land on at least a door and stand at that door and knock until the door is opened, meaning I can't be involved in all forms of healing. I'm going to have to make some choices, which means, like we know, the word decision has that notion of death in it. The homicide, decide, has that notion of cutting off. You're cutting off other options when you choose this option. You can't do it all, and it may not be the right choice, but you've got to make a choice and now walk in it for a season to see what it brings and how, in one sense, the connective links to others, people, but also other processes open the door for even more change. So the idea of you have made some very significant choices this year. What door are you knocking on?
Well, I am knocking very specifically on the door of gut health, because for me that has been pretty central to a lot of my autoimmune stuff. And so that's going to be something, and for me, what that will look like is nourishing. It's not deprivation. In some ways, I'm participating in deprivation by eating a lot of like fast food and like high sugar things, and not actually giving my body some of the nourishment that it's really asking for. I guess I got to be knocking on the door of some emotional health in a more intentional way. I am going to be pursuing some EMDR and acupuncture around some of the ways I'm getting triggered with regard to my toddler. Not just for her sake, but for my sake and for both of our sakes. And yeah, I need a deeper spiritual healing. So as much as I'm scared of that, like I'm humble enough and I've been around the block enough to know if you say yes to Jesus, like some things might happen that bring change or invite you to change or transformation. And I'm stubborn. I've always been stubborn. And God has made it very clear. God loves that about me. My stubbornness, my strong will. It's part of how God made me. And so there's actually been there's a lot of graciousness there, but I feel an invitation of like, your bitterness is not keeping you safe, and it's not making you well. And it's actually physically, emotionally, spiritually blocking me from comfort, from grief that will probably bring some comfort, and from connection that I'm meant for and is actually probably available to me. That's, again, that I don't feel condemnation there. That's come very gently and in a way that like I actually feel desire to move toward that. So those are some ways. In the midst of that, a huge kind of intention for our family in this season is deeper community connection here in our local neighborhood, with our neighbors, with faith community, with friends, to actually, prepare for whatever is going to come with some of the shifts in our nation, and the ways that it might impact more vulnerable communities. So that actually feels deeply connected to
your gut,
the trust of healing and gut and all the things we're talking about.
Yeah. Well, in so many ways, at least I would underscore your healing is oriented toward your splagna, the Greek word for guts, stomach, essentially, that you are being called to put it in not a trivial way, but an incidental way, a change of diet, a change of not merely food, but how you feed and nourish your heart. And it's interesting that you are focused on a part of your body, which obviously affects the entirety of your body. But it's really actually helpful to have that frame of, well, you're not working on your shoulder. You're working on your gut, your splagna. And if I were to focus on that for what Annie provoked, is I'm, working on my dorsolateral prefrontal cortex, which is what holds significant amounts of memory and emotion and choice. So even being able to have language, like Becky and I were walking, and she was like, "What do I need to be praying for you?" And it was like, my DLFPFC, my dorsolateral prefrontal cortex, needs care. And just even being able, it was ridiculous, but wonderful to name. This is the part of the body that I'm asking Jesus, I'm asking good care from friends to connect, to pray, to be part of healing. And in that, yes, we're knocking on the door. And who knows where all this will go. But we know at least three core things. We can't do this without our story. We can't engage any of this healing process without knowing more of how our story past has played and continues to play in the present. We can't know our story without relationships, which ultimately means community. So we can't change, can't see healing without an engagement, not just in a process like going to a physician, but actually seeing the healing process as a larger community relational realm, both in terms of the heartbreak and at times illness of deprivation of systems and finances for people to see healing, but also to be able to enter into what we can do, irrespective of access that we have. And I think the third is obvious, and that is all healing is centered on the person of Jesus, and in the Spirit's work of drawing out the ache, but also providing something of the taste of hope to continue in this process. And so I will, this podcast will not be, shall we say, finished until we see the end of the year, where I can perhaps close to the end of the year be able to say, so how are your guts? And you can say, well, how's your prefrontal cortex?
Yes, indeed. Thank you again for joining us. We hope that the conversations we share with you here on the Allender Center podcast have touched your heart and sparked a sense of hope within you. Our work at the Allender Center is fueled by the support of people like you. As a nonprofit organization housed within the Seattle School of Theology and Psychology, our mission is to boldly engage the impact of trauma and abuse on the human heart and to provide hope and healing to individuals, families, and communities. Your contributions directly contribute to making this vision a reality. If you feel moved to join us in this work, we invite you to consider making a one-time or monthly gift. Your donation, no matter the size, plays a significant role in bringing the hope of redemption and healing to so many. To give, simply visit theallendercenter.org/give. Once again, we extend our heartfelt gratitude for your support. Together, we can continue to bring hope and healing to those who need it. Thank you. The Allender Center podcast is produced by the Seattle School of Theology and Psychology.
If you'd like more information about the Allender Center, you can look at theallendercenter.org.